Welcome to another episode of CTR TV. My guest today is a delightful man, a good friend and a treasured parishioner. But our topic might not seem quite so delightful, although it is important. The topic is prayer with the dying, and my guest is Roy Gordon of our parish. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you, Msgr. Great to be here with you again.
Roy, I could be talking to you for an hour or two on a whole bunch of subjects, but today we've chosen specifically to introduce the parishioners to you wearing a particular hat. They've listened to you as chair of the Parish Council and other ways over the years, but right now we're talking about prayer with the dying. It's a ministry, it's a call, and it's one that you have discerned in conversation with me, and more specifically in conversation with God, as you've kind of interrogated your own experiences, as you've reflected, as we should do when trying to hear what God is saying to us over the last few years. So can you tell us a little bit about how you felt drawn to prayer with the dying?
Well, Msgr, it started with a long period of spending time with a dying nephew who sadly had a brain tumor in his mid-30s, a man with a young wife and turned out later 2 little children. And in his last 4 or 5 months I spent a lot of time with him because most of his extended family were in a different country. And he had left his faith at a young age. So I didn't ever talk to him about faith. I just spent time with him. I didn't talk to him about prayer. But the more and more time I spent with him, the more I began to feel that he wanted more than just our discussions about rugby and family and that sort of thing. And one day I'd been with him for an hour or so, and he was asking me for something, at that point he was unable to really communicate verbally, but he could communicate in a very silent way and with his hands. And I went through the whole list of things that I thought he might be asking for. Water, blanket, to move a bit, and I exhausted all the avenues, and then it dawned on me. I said to him, "Nick, do you want to pray?" And he nodded his head quite strongly. So we prayed, and I prayed with him for some time. And then when I'd finished, after about 10 minutes, he raised his hand and thanked me. The next day, it didn't repeat itself, but on many of the days after that it did. And then the day before he died, some quite interesting things happened to me. I was very angry, I think, because I didn't feel that God was listening to our prayers, to my prayers for him. And I had words with God. I mean, I speak out loudly when I'm having a conversation with God often. And I even said to him, I said, you aren't even listening to your mother, because I've been praying the rosary every day. And having done that, there was an overwhelming feeling I had about a message. And I don't know where that thought came from, but then I had to visit Nick in the afternoon. And when I arrived there, he said he wanted to pray, or indicated he wanted to pray. And then the thought just came to my head that I should tell him about my own journey of faith in a very brief way. And I said to him, "Nick, do you want to hear about my journey of faith?" And he nodded his head quite vigorously. So I told him briefly about it. Said prayers with him, said prayers for his children, and then he took my hand and he kissed my hand 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and then gestured to me that I could go now, with a big smile on his face. And it occurred to me, actually, it was not God working through me to him, it was God working through him to me. I mean, that was the extraordinary thing. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. And he'd found his way back to God, and I actually had to go and make my peace with God and say, listen, I'm terribly sorry about that outburst. And thank you for the forgiveness through Nick. So it was an extraordinary time, and he died the next day. And then I think, obviously one thinks about those things a lot, and another very good friend of mine was dying here in Vancouver this year, and I'd ended up spending a lot of time at his bedside, and he was a very committed Anglican but felt that God had abandoned him. In fact, he and his wife had run Alpha in their home for 10 years, so a very committed guy, but he really felt God had abandoned him. So I sat with him, and every time I did, we would pray together, and he'd want me to pray. And at the probably 3 or 4 days before he died was the last time I saw him. We prayed very intensely, and it was very moving. It wasn't disturbing, it wasn't depressing, it was uplifting. Because at the end of the prayers, he smiled at me, held my hand. He hadn't held my hand for months and months because of COVID, but he wanted to hold my hand, held my hand, squeezed it, and that was the last time I saw him. But it was very uplifting, and the message I think that I got from him: it's okay, I've made my peace. God is with me, and I'm with God. That just was the message, I'm absolutely sure. So thinking about all that, for some weeks, many weeks after that, I just thought of those two experiences and thought, well, praying with the dying is actually not a depressing thing at all. It's a way of communicating with God and helping people who are in distress do the same. And sometimes they help you. So I then came to talk to you, Monsignor, to ask what you thought about this. Was whistling Dixie, was it a stupid idea? Was it just these two experiences that had been like that, or was this something that perhaps I could do with others if they wanted it? So that's why I'm here.
The fact is that, although, as you say, it's not depressing, it can be comforting to you as well as to the other person, it's not something everyone is comfortable with.
No, that is for sure. That is for sure. So even the close relatives of my nephew and my good friend were very uncomfortable praying with him. It just did not fit well with them.
I think in the first place, a lot of Catholics have never learned to pray spontaneously with someone. And in the second place, people are afraid to acknowledge that someone is dying. And it's hard to pray sincerely without that being part of what you're doing. And when you came to me and talked about the idea of whether this was something we might offer in the parish, I recognized it as a call, particularly because when we're called to do something, we are given the grace to do it. And you had the grace to do it with comfort, because a ministry performed by someone who's anxious and uncomfortable is not going to be consoling and that effective. And so I recognized right away that there was really a gift that you had received to do this in such an effective and gentle way. And that struck me as very important. Now, at the same time, I wonder if we could possibly say that prayer with the dying is a way in which we can respond to people who aren't ready for the sacraments. Because as Catholics, when they call the priest, there's this sense that the sacrament of the sick or penance is what is called for. But people are not always ready for a sacramental encounter when they are dying. And we still cannot say, well, you're not ready for the sacraments, so we have nothing to offer. I think it's very important to recognize that in neither of these cases were the sacraments as such what the person was ready for. And so we become a kind of sacrament with a small s to them of the love of Christ.
A sample of one experience, I think that's right. I mean, in the case of my nephew, when he was still able to converse, which was about 4 months before he died, another nephew who's very spiritual flew from South Africa to London to be with him, to say to him, please, Nick, have the last rites. And at that point, Nick said no. But I have no doubt in my mind that in the weeks, maybe the months leading up to his death, I have no doubt in my mind that that's what he wanted in one form or another. I have no doubt about it.
I also think we sometimes have non-Catholic family or friends who would benefit from the church's ministry, but who obviously are not ready for the sacraments. Some towards the end of life, as happened recently, wish to be received into the Catholic Church and benefit from the sacramental graces. But everybody needs help, and if the parish can offer it to non-Catholic family and friends who are willing to be prayed with, it's a great thing.
Well, let me give you some interesting examples. I have two friends here in Vancouver, both of whom are atheists. I have other friends as well. One of them contracted a very, very serious immunodisease, and was told that his lifespan was going to be limited. I organized with the good sisters at Queen of Peace to have a rosary made for him, and I gave it to him, and he's an atheist. He was so grateful. He keeps it next to his bed, he tells me, and he counts his blessings every night. So there are all sorts of ways that God works. The second friend, also an atheist, developed cancer earlier this year and was life-threatening. I had a rosary made for him. I gave it to him. And he says to me today that it is the most important thing in his life. It saved him. He says the rosary saved him. He doesn't know how or why, but it saved him. And he keeps it in his pocket all day. And he's still not a believer. But God works in strange ways.
Sure he does.
So you don't have to get into a deeply dark mode of praying with the dying. You can be joyful with them, and you should be, to the extent that you see is appropriate. And there are all sorts of ways of praying with the dying. Giving them a rosary, saying a prayer with them, saying quiet prayers or silent prayers with them, even if they don't hear you, because maybe they don't want to hear you. But there are ways of doing it, and you just have to follow your heart and follow guidance that God gives you, because He does. I mean, if you every day I went in to see my nephew, I would say to God, "This is going to be difficult. You help me." And He does. He does.
One of the reasons that I'm very glad that we're doing this on video rather than just putting an announcement in the bulletin or preaching about it is that I think people are meeting you in this video, and they recognize that you are by temperament a soft-spoken, person who's not going to come in and distress people by a overly energetic or style of prayer. You're going to respond prayerfully yourself to what you find in their homes, by their bedsides, and pray in a way that is not going to threaten people or come on too strong. I think that that's one of the reasons people may be reluctant to ask for prayer, because they think it's going to come on too strong.
Yeah, I think that's always a risk. I learned many years ago that you can't force, we human beings dare not and cannot force God's message down anybody's throat. And all one wants to do when you're with somebody who's dying is just to be there, present, supportive, helpful, and praying in a way that is appropriate to them, to their circumstance. So, it may, as I say, it may be a quiet prayer that they don't even hear. Or, if they want it, a quiet prayer that they listen to or participate in. And I think God gives us guidance in what to say. I don't always say the standard prayers of Our Father or Hail Mary. Prayers come to you as you sit there with that person. You get to know the person better, and their families and their extended families and their wishes and their fears, and so you'll be inspired. You will receive inspiration as to what to do. So that's the way I approach it.
Roy Gordon, thanks for being with us, and thanks even more for offering this really needed ministry to our parishioners, to their family members. We will certainly make it clear how you can contact Roy and how his ministry will be exercised in the parish in the coming days. So thank you very much, Roy, for being with us. It's been a very great privilege to hear the story of your prayer ministry, and it's going to be wonderful to see what it accomplishes in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.